Midnight, deep within the Kentucky Appalachians, in 1958, a secret so dark lay hidden that it would stay buried for decades. The Blackwood family, rooted in that remote area since the 1800s, engaged in a practice that defied not just societal laws, but the very laws of nature. 021. This is the disturbing chronicle of generations of familial unions, leading to one of the most impactful stories in human genetics ever recorded on American soil. The Blackwoods inhabited a secluded 40-acre property, enveloped by dense forest and shielded by steep cliffs that made approach nearly impossible for outsiders. They created a self-reliant existence, growing their own food and seldom descending to the nearby town of Pine Creek, a community of just 800 people back then. Sarah Jenkins, now 89 years old and one of 054, the final living witnesses to those times, shares what many locals suspected. Their visits to town happened maybe twice annually, for items they couldn't produce themselves. It was always the same man, Augustus Blackwood, with his wary eyes and pale complexion. He never brought the family along. The documented story of the Blackwoods starts with Jeremiah Blackwood, who arrived in that region during 1871, escaping legal troubles in Virginia. 121, period documents show he was accompanied only by his sister cousin, who later became his wife. Together, they founded what would turn into a dynasty, isolated by their own design. Marriages between cousins weren't so unusual back then, particularly in remote locations, explains Dr. Martin Calloway, a geneticist from the University of Kentucky who investigated the Blackwood case extensively. 146. The real trouble starts when that kind of pattern repeats across generations, dramatically increasing the odds for recessive genetic conditions to appear. And that's precisely the fate of the Blackwoods. For nearly 90 years, the household preserved a closed bloodline, with marriages taking place only among close-kin brothers and sisters, parents and children, uncles and nieces, a tangled network of relationships that produced an ever more compromised genetic makeup. 215. By 1958, when the truth finally surfaced, the family had reached its fifth generation of these consanguineous unions. The patriarch was Augustus Blackwood, Jeremiah's great-grandson, who rigidly controlled a property housing 27 individuals, all interrelated in complex, intimate ways. The exposure of events on Blackwood land came after a fierce storm battered the region in March 1958. 240. Floodwaters destroyed a segment of the remote road leading to their property, compelling Augustus to seek medical help for family members hurt during the tempest. Dr. William Carter, at that time Pine Creek's sole physician, was summoned to go back with Augustus to the property. What he encountered there would permanently alter his understanding of human isolation and the biological outcomes of interfamily unions. 308. I will never forget that day, Carter noted in his journal, which was only found in 1982 following his death. The main house was big yet falling apart. Scattered across the land were other small structures. Augustus led me to a converted barn, where I discovered a young man, roughly 25, with a broken leg. Yet that wasn't what stunned me. 330. It was his appearance, a protruding jaw, significant recession, fused fingers, and clear intellectual impairment. While attending to the injury, Dr. Carter detected noises originating from the barn's upper floor. Augustus tried to discourage him from investigating, but the doctor persisted, saying he needed to check for additional injuries. 349. Upon reaching the second floor, what he witnessed he described as an image that would pursue me until my final moments. 5 people, whom the doctor estimated to be between 15 and 40 years old, were held in makeshift enclosures. All displayed serious physical malformations, many couldn't speak or be understood, some had very restricted movement. Sanitary conditions were terrible, though signs suggested someone tried to keep them fed and minimally cared for. 418. By the way, if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, now's a good time. The science behind such stories can uncover genetic secrets impacting everyone's health, including yours. And grasping genetics is key to understanding how our evolution has been shaped. When confronted, Augustus Blackwood first responded with hostility, but realizing the gravity of the situation, he eventually revealed a disturbing narrative that had unfolded over generations. 444. According to him, the family believed they were refining their blood through these unions, a twisted conviction handed down as a cherished tradition. My grandfather. He used to say our blood was unique, that it shouldn't get mixed with outsiders' blood. Augustus supposedly explained to Dr. Carter, when the first babies arrived different, we thought it was just a temporary challenge, that coming generations would grow stronger. 512, county documents, though limited, confirm elements of this account. Between 1871 and 1958, merely 7 birth certificates were officially filed for the Blackwood family, a number inconsistent with the family's known size. Later probes revealed numerous births occurred on the property without any official paperwork, enabling the household to keep its most affected members entirely hidden from public view. 538, unregistered births allowed the Blackwoods to conceal those with the gravest deformities from society. These people never attended school, never got proper medical care, and in many instances never left the confines of the property throughout their lives. The Blackwood situation stands as one of the most extreme documented examples of purposeful genetic isolation in contemporary America, remarks Dr. 604, Eleanor Whitney, an anthropologist who researched the case during the 1970s. Its uniqueness stems from how, unlike other secluded communities that might occasionally resort to consanguineous marriage out of necessity or exchange, the Blackwoods practiced it systematically and deliberately for nearly 100 years. Following the initial revelation, Dr. 628, Carter confronted a major ethical and legal predicament. Kentucky law at that time already banned marriages among close relatives, but intervening in isolated communities proved tricky, particularly since many adults on Blackwood land had never been officially recorded as citizens. After 3 days of contemplation, Carter decided to notify local authorities. 651, Sheriff James Monroe, along with 2 deputies, visited the property on April 2, 1958. The official account describes an intensely wary family, whose members clearly had never interacted with outsiders. We discovered a troubling situation demanding urgent action, Monroe wrote in his report. 713, individuals with obvious medical needs, unsuitable living conditions for those with disabilities, and unmistakable signs of forced isolation for certain family members. The authorities' intervention led to 8 Blackwood individuals being removed from the property. All had substantial physical deformities and varying levels of cognitive disability. 734, initially, they were taken to Lexington Regional Hospital, where physicians studied their conditions. Dr. Howard Phillips, a geneticist who examined Blackwood family members in 1958, catalogued various conditions now recognized as typical of highly inbred groups. Polydactyly, extra digits, syndactyly, fused fingers, microcephaly, severe facial abnormalities, and numerous instances of mental impairment. 805, what we are observing here, Phillips wrote in his medical notes, is the expression of uncommon recessive genes that, in populations with greater genetic variety, would stay dormant. When close relatives have offspring, the probability that both carry the same damaging recessive gene rises sharply, resulting in the conditions we documented. 827, younger family members disclosed similarly disturbing elements of existence on Blackwood land. Martha, then 19 and one of the few able to communicate clearly, explained how the more visibly affected members were segregated from others, living in buildings next to the main house. 847, Mom said it was to shield them. Martha told social workers that the outside world would treat them harshly, but I suspect it was more about hiding them. Some of them I only saw when delivering food. Officials faced an unprecedented scenario handling the Blackwood family. Most adults taken from the property lacked any official identification, no birth certificates, school records, or medical documents. 9/11, legally, they simply didn't exist. The case sparked substantial ethical discussion. On one hand, the living conditions of those kept apart were obviously insufficient. On the other, the family had developed its own care system, however basic, and outside intervention meant a traumatic disruption for individuals who had never experienced any alternative reality. 934, the Blackwood discovery revealed a gap in our social systems, notes Dr. Richard Branson, a medical ethics authority who examined the case decades later. As a society, we presume certain behaviors are universally shunned. But this case demonstrated that with enough isolation, communities might develop radically different standards, with devastating outcomes. 957, During the weeks after the initial intervention, authorities mapped out the Blackwoods' intricate family structure. Augustus, then 47, was simultaneously cousin and half-brother to his wife, Eliza. Among their 9 children together, 3 had serious deformities and had been confined to the modified barn. 1017, investigation revealed this separation practice had started 2 generations prior, when the first obvious signs of genetic issues emerged. Initially, these individuals were kept within the family circle, but as deformities grew more pronounced in later generations, isolation became the norm. 1037, Robert Blackwood, Augustus's cousin and one of the few family members who occasionally left the property for seasonal work on nearby farms, offered a disturbing testimony. It began with my grandfather insisting the family's blood was special, that we needed to preserve our lineage pure. When babies started being born different, he said it was a faith test, that eventually perfect children would be born. 1105, we kept going. This warped belief had evolved into a kind of family creed, with each generation's patriarch reinforcing the necessity of blood purity, despite mounting evidence of the harm it caused. District Prosecutor Richard Thornton initially considered filing criminal charges against the family's adults, yet the situation involved significant legal complexities. 1131, many practices had originated in earlier generations when laws were less defined, and there was no proof of intentional cruelty, only extreme ignorance and isolation. Media attention further complicated matters. As initial reports spread, journalists nationwide flocked to Pine Creek. 1151, the Blackwood tale, with its disturbing elements of seclusion, interfamily unions, and concealed relatives, seized the American public's imagination. If you've heard our story, pause for a moment and reflect on the humans suffering beneath the sensational headlines. These are genuine people whose lives were molded by terrible decisions they never chose. 1213, drop a comment with the word genetics to show you grasp the gravity of this case. The Louisville Courier-Journal was first to publish a detailed piece on the situation, on April 15, 1958, headlined Isolated Family Reveals Dark Genetic Secrets in the Kentucky Mountains. The article, while somewhat sensationalist, offered the first public examination of the case's scientific implications. Dr. 1242, James Richardson, a geneticist from the University of Louisville, explained to the reporter, "What we see in the Blackwood case is a stark demonstration of the hazards from repeated consanguineous unions. Each generation amplifies the concentration of shared genes, and thus the probability that harmful recessive conditions will appear." 1302, the article included photos of the property, but by court order, none of the family members. Even so, the impact was immediate. Letters poured into the newspaper, some expressing compassion, some horror, and some disturbingly revealing a morbid fascination with the case. Mary Sullivan, a social worker assigned to help the younger family members, documented the tough transition they underwent. 1327, they're both traumatized by separation from their family and amazed by a world they could barely imagine. Elizabeth, age 12, had never seen a television before and thought the people inside were real, just very tiny. The 8 individuals taken from the property were eventually split between medical facilities and temporary foster homes. 1349, for those with more extreme deformities and significant cognitive impairment, the outlook was bleak during an era when options for disabled individuals were limited. The Blackwood case prompted major changes in social assistance and monitoring policies for isolated Kentucky communities. In subsequent weeks, the state's Social Services Department initiated a specific program to identify and oversee families living in extreme isolation across mountainous regions. 1417, we cannot permit another Blackwood situation to develop without stepping in, declared Kentucky Governor A.B. Chandler at a press conference in May 1958. We honor people's rights to follow their traditions, but not when those practices cause clear harm to vulnerable individuals. The Blackwood property was partially seized by the state to cover care costs and assistance for family members now under government protection. 1447, Augustus and some adult relatives were permitted to stay on a reduced portion of the original land, subject to regular official supervision. The fates of those removed from the property varied widely. The 4 most severely disabled were sent to Pine Meadows State Institute, a facility for people with intellectual and physical disabilities. 1507, despite good intentions, the institution at that time primarily offered basic custodial care, with few opportunities for growth or integration. They moved from one form of isolation to another, remarked Dr. Whitney in her case study. The difference was they now received proper medical attention and decent living conditions, yet remained separated from mainstream society. 1529, for the younger ones and those with less severe disabilities, integration attempts were made. Martha and Elizabeth Blackwood, for instance, were placed in a Lexington foster home and eventually managed to attend a special school. Martha, who showed remarkable intelligence despite limited schooling, later became an important voice raising awareness about consanguinity's dangers. 1553, in a rare 1978 interview at age 39, Martha reflected on her experience. "I grew up thinking our way of life was normal, that the outside world was strange and threatening. The shift was painful but essential. Today I realize what happened in our family resulted from ignorance and isolation, not malice." 1618, the scientific dimension of the Blackwood case became a subject of study at universities nationwide. In 1962, Dr. Phillips published a detailed paper in the Journal of Medical Genetics, analyzing inheritance patterns and physical manifestations seen in the family. The Blackwood case grants us an unparalleled chance to examine extreme endogamy's effects on humans. 1645, Phillips wrote, "Observed anomalies validate theories about recessive gene expression in isolated groups and enhance our grasp of genetic inheritance mechanisms." The article thoroughly documented various observed conditions, including, besides the previously noted polydactyly and syndactyly, instances of cleft lip, cleft palate, microcephaly, prognathism, protruding jaw, and a range of skeletal abnormalities. 1712, in some individuals, multiple conditions overlapped, creating complex clinical pictures. Blood analyses, conducted with then available techniques, confirmed the high consanguinity level, with serum protein patterns showing significantly greater homozygosity than the general population, a clear marker of inbreeding. 1734, a particularly disturbing aspect was evidence that deformities had grown progressively more severe across generations. Recovered photographs of the property, showing different family generations, revealed a distinct pattern of worsening physical anomalies. "What we are seeing, Dr. 1754, Callaway explained at a 1965 genetics symposium, is the cumulative effect of inbreeding depression, the decline in biological fitness due to increased homozygosity. Each consanguineous marriage generation raised the chance for harmful alleles to manifest in homozygous form." The case also sparked substantial ethical debates within the medical community. 1818, while some researchers viewed the Blackwoods primarily as a scientific study subject, others highlighted the human tragedy dimension and questioned whether intervention could have happened sooner. "There were signs," Dr. Carter stated in his testimony. "Townsfolk suspected something was off with that family for decades, but they respected their isolation out of tradition." 1839, this raises questions about when privacy respect should yield to concern for well-being. 6 to 7 years after the initial discovery, the Blackwood legacy continues to resonate, both in science and society. The original property was fully abandoned during the 1970s after Augustus's death, and today it's merely a collection of ruins overtaken by vegetation, a silent monument to a human tragedy that unfolded far from society's gaze. 1909, Martha Blackwood dedicated much of her adult life to educating people about consanguinity dangers. Before her passing in 2009, she helped establish a foundation offering genetic counseling to isolated Appalachian communities, where genetic knowledge can still be limited. "What occurred in my family wasn't just a personal tragedy," she wrote in her memoirs, published in 1990. 1933, it was a collective failure of education, social support, and oversight that let people live so marginally that they could develop such harmful practices without intervention. Advances in genetics over subsequent decades provided even deeper insight into what happened with the Blackwoods. 1953, DNA analyses performed in 1992 on some survivors confirmed what scientists of that era only hypothesized. The family's inbreeding coefficient ranked among the highest ever documented in human studies, surpassing even that of European royalty. What the Blackwood case has taught us, explains Dr. Jennifer Reynolds, a geneticist at Johns Hopkins University, is that genetic diversity isn't just an abstract concept but a fundamental biological necessity. 2022, when a population, even just one family, remains genetically isolated across generations, the outcomes are inevitable and frequently devastating. The Blackwood story also transformed how the social services system approaches isolated communities. The Kentucky program developed in response to the case was later adapted by other states with remote rural populations, emphasizing offering help without unnecessary judgment or interference in traditional lifestyles. 2052, the challenge, says Robert Thompson, current director of Kentucky's Department of Social Services, lies in finding equilibrium between respecting community autonomy and ensuring harmful practices don't occur in isolation. The Blackwood case showed us that compassionate intervention may be necessary even when not requested. 2112, lessons from the Blackwood case extend beyond the Appalachians. Globally, researchers cite the case when studying other isolated populations, from insular religious communities to minority ethnic groups who, for cultural or geographic reasons, practice endogamous marriages. What makes the Blackwood case so scientifically valuable, explains Dr. 2136, Calloway, is that it revealed not just the final outcome, but the gradual process by which genetic isolation led to progressive manifestation of hereditary conditions over multiple generations. Today, the few direct Blackwood descendants who know their family history typically prefer anonymity, fearing the stigma attached to the case. 2158, many have changed their surnames and integrated fully into mainstream society. One such descendant, who requested anonymity, shared, "I grew up unaware of this story. Discovering it at 19 was a shock. I immediately sought genetic counseling and learned that since my grandfather married outside the family, my risk of carrying harmful genetic conditions isn't significantly higher than the general population's." 2226, the Blackwood case remains a powerful reminder of extreme isolation's dangers and ignorance about basic genetic principles. It also illustrates how distorted beliefs can perpetuate in closed communities, fostering practices that seem clearly harmful from outside, yet may be perceived as traditions worth preserving from within. 2248, the story doesn't conclude with the Blackwoods, says Dr. Reynolds. Even today, across various world regions, communities exist where close relative marriage is common, whether due to cultural tradition, geographic seclusion, or unawareness of associated risks. What we learned from Blackwood remains relevant and necessary. 2311, if you've stayed this long, it means you enjoyed this tale. Drop a comment saying I watched here so I can recognize you and know who genuinely appreciates the stories on this channel. Be sure to leave your like and share this narrative with others you think would be interested in these historical and scientific accounts revealing lesser-known aspects of human genetics. 2329, and remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming investigations into cases that science is still striving to fully comprehend.